Hey, everybody. Welcome to Freeology Friday. I am Aaron Tomlinson, and he is.
I am Derrick Day. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
I am doing excellent.
Good. Glad to hear it. What you drinking tonight?
Oh man, I'm going light.
Yeah.
Pinot Noir.
Uh, I almost did a red blend, but I'm doing a Bloody Mary
Oh,
with V8 juice, Worcestershire sauce, of course. What else did I put in there? A little bit of jalapeno and lime juice and chili infused vodka.
ooh, ooh! I bet that's good. That definitely needs to go in the mixology book.
Yeah, it's not bad. Not bad. Probably Bloody Mary mix would be better than the V8 juice, but that's what I had on hand.
Yeah, like I like making Bloody Marys with clamato, because I like the clam broth flavor, but I
Yeah.
kind of steer away from it because clamato is full of high fructose corn syrup,
Oh,
and
I have
I'm
no
like,
idea.
why? So there's a trick to it. If you find a Bloody Mary mix that doesn't have the extra sugar, just buy some clam broth and add a little clam broth to
Oh,
it.
yeah, that would work, huh?
Yep.
Yeah. I did
All the flavor of the clamato without any of the distractions.
I did a seafood boil this week for the
Ooh,
family for Mardi Gras.
nice.
We had mussels though, not clams.
That's okay. Mussels are still good.
Yeah, mussels, shrimp, crab. Um, God, what's that other fish called? I can't remember. Scallops,
Oh yeah,
and then corn and sausage and
nice.
potatoes. Yeah, it was good. Boy said it was too spicy.
oh,
I made enough. I tell you what, man, I made enough to have 50 people over. I got
wow.
leftovers galore.
I'm gonna have to check the flights to Colorado, man.
Yeah. Yeah, wasn't bad. Wasn't bad. A little bit of crawfish would have been nice.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I live in Colorado.
Hey, but you got shrimp, you got scallops, so
Yeah, I did.
yeah, you covered and you have mussels. I mean, that's pretty exotic for Colorado.
Yeah, and you buy them live. So,
Yeah.
but no crawfish. I haven't seen crawfish. So, anyway, what are we talking about tonight?
You know what? We had said Christ consciousness, but I want to kind of unpack it a little bit. I don't want to.
Sure.
I want to talk about consciousness in a broader sense,
Sure.
and the reason why I thought about this is if you look at quantum physics,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to try to make this as
Take your time.
simple as possible, but quantum physics says that when you observe a quantum phenomenon, quantum particle or wave or anything like that, that the mere fact that you observe it
Right.
dictates the behavior of it, and that's kind of found like in the double slit experiment,
Right.
where you get an interference pattern when you fire an electron through the double slit. Um, and the interesting thing about it is that you can try to detect it on the other side, but what it'll do is it'll change the pattern. So it's like the fact that you're trying to observe it changes the outcome. And if you take away that detection, it begins to form the standard interference pattern.
Right.
So I was thinking about this. If what we observe at the quantum level, and to be honest, even when we look at things at the macro level, at the Newtonian physics level, right, that matter, what we consider to be matter, things we could touch, and all of that. We're still observing quantum phenomena. We're just not observing it directly. We're observing it in a broader context. So by that standard, observation should impact outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And then that begs the question, what then is reality?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
So you and I, we talked about this before. We talked about this in previous shows, and we talked about this offline, that I believe that certain things, like if you look at a TV, it's a TV. Well,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know it's a TV when the mere fact that you're observing it is changing the outcome?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happens is I think that there are two things: that observation and agreement. And I think that agreement causes the wave function to collapse and produce something that we all agree that this is a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is what. So when I think about this, I say, okay, consciousness therefore dictates reality,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That without consciousness there is no reality.
Mm-hmm.
We look at things and it doesn't collapse into something that we call something existent
Mm-hmm.
until that wave function collapse. So it's observation, because observation influences outcome, and the agreement. So we all agree at a macro level that this thing is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about that, like that in the term of Christ consciousness. So I want to touch on this just briefly. That when we talk about Christ consciousness, we're talking about what is anointed, because
Mm-hmm.
Christ in the Greek means anointed one, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So what is anointing? And remember, when we were preaching, people will say, "Oh, you have the anointing,"
Mm-hmm.
or "Your church isn't growing because you lack the anointing," or but it was a thing that was attached to a person. But I think that anointing is simply our connection to the network of consciousness. That all of us are anointed. That in other words, that we are all Christ,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when we observe this Christ, the observation changes the outcome, but what do we agree on? And I think that part of the problem is that when we say Christ consciousness and we assign Christ consciousness to a historical figure, e.g., Jesus, right? That what we're saying is that this is the thing. This is the manifestation of anointing. And when we do that, we sell ourselves short.
Mm-hmm.
We abdicate our Christ, and as a result, we have observation, but we don't have agreement,
Mm-hmm.
because religion in and of itself is designed to create disagreement. I'm putting it out there, because that's, if you look at it objectively, that's the truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I think that if we think higher, let's elevate our thinking, let's vibrate higher, right?
Yep.
And if we vibrate higher, then we see, okay, Christ is not, because contrary to popular belief, Jesus' name is not Jesus H. Christ, right? If you looked at his name in the Hebrew,
Where did the H come from? I've always wondered that.
I don't know, is it Herman or Hell on Wheels, or I don't know, but that if you looked at Jesus's name in the context of the culture, his name would have been Yeshua ben Yosef.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That would have been his proper name, right?
Right.
So, or if you want to, say, ascribe the whole God thing, maybe, Yeshua ben Yahweh. I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
it isn't Jesus and it isn't Christ. That's not the name. Christ means anointed. And one of the things that I want to unpack in this discussion is that we have to get past what we think Christ is. Because if we ascribe it to a person, a historical figure, then what we're doing is we're saying, okay, this is something external to us. It's something that I cannot access, I cannot achieve, I cannot participate in, because I'm not that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you flip it around and you say, okay, I am Christ. I am Christ. I am anointed. I am plugged in. I am jacked in to the greater consciousness. Therefore, I am God. Now, when you start changing this, and watch this, because you and I, And I gotta give a shout out to my brother Irvin Reed, because I was talking with Irv before I came on the show, as I was making my way back to Arlington here.
Mm-hmm.
That that if we were to say, if everybody gets this notion, I am Christ, right? I am God. I am part of the collective, the greater consciousness, right? Now you say, first of all, I'm participating in this agreement. So, like I was saying, like you and I, we've talked about healings. We've seen healings. I think that you and I have both seen everything short of the dead being raised,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
What if that those types of phenomenon depend on a form of agreement? That there has to be a larger agreement, or the absence of disagreement. Like, let's say, because a lot of times we'll see like a healing or something manifest where it's just you and I and the other person, right? Well, at that point, there's no external variables. There's no disagreement in the mix. We have agreed that there is going to be a healing, and we see the healing manifest, right? But when you start introducing a crowd, if the crowd is not completely on board, are you going to see it?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, maybe not. At that point, it becomes kind of, it becomes a little ambiguous,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what I want to talk about here is, I want to get to, okay, what is consciousness? First of all, I think that consciousness is life in its most fundamental sense, because the minute you become conscious is the moment you become alive. Life and consciousness they're hand in hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
does this say that consciousness ends after the body ends? No. And I'm going to talk about this because I want to talk about, I'm going to just hint on this real quick, because you're going to love this, right? That when black holes were first discovered, it was assumed that they were destroyers of the universe. They were like the character Galactus in the Fantastic Four comics, right? Mm-hmm. That he devoured planets, devoured worlds. He thrived on that energy. So Galactus was a living, breathing, personified black hole. Mm-hmm. But now we're seeing that what happens, that what the math says now is that when you pass the event horizon, which is the threshold of the black hole, that everything, including light, compresses into a singularity. And when you think singularity, what do you think of? The Big Bang, right? Right. So you have this singularity from which everything sprang forth. What if black holes are like the cosmos's recycle bins, right? That this matter, this energy is collected in this black hole, is compressed into a singularity, and boom, another universe is birthed on the other side of it, which mathematically that would kind of hook up with the whole multiverse theory. Mm-hmm. And so here's where I'm getting at. This is my teaser for the whole black hole discussion, right? What if when we die, that our energy collapses into our own personal black hole, and then emerges on the other side in some other dimensional form? That's my opening salvo into this. But I want to think about consciousness, and what I want to do is, what I'm really hoping to do today is to unpack consciousness in a very macro sense, but separate consciousness from religion in a micro sense. I want to go from the cosmos to the quantum in this discussion, and I'm hoping that. And I know, like, sometimes I get in my own head, and I get really, and I want to try to make this as easy for people to understand, because I think that if you get this, if you see this, it may not change your mind. That's not the goal of this. That's not the objective of this discussion. But if it makes you think about this, and again, I know I really believe that a lot of what we consider to be spirituality, like, there's a lot of research being done into consciousness now, and we're understanding it in ways that we never have scientifically. Will we ever get it completely? I don't know, maybe not. But the point that I'm getting at is that I know that you had said in a post earlier today that science doesn't explain everything, and it doesn't. But that's the beauty of science, is that science is falsifiable, and therefore it can expand in the presence of better information.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we talk about metaphysical or mystical spirituality, I think that we see the same. We see something similar to science, that we see a certain falsifiability that allows that field of study to grow and expand.
Yeah.
Whereas religion, when you look at it from a religious, narrow-minded religious standpoint, there is no falsifiability and therefore no possibility for growth. And that is where I will shut up.
No, that's good, man. You set it up a lot. My mind's going a million different directions with this. So just, for people that didn't see my Facebook post, or if you did, I don't know why I posted that. Do you ever post something? You're just like, you wake up the next morning. I mean, because I posted it before I went to bed. You wake up the next morning like, what the hell?
No, here's the thing. Is sometimes I do that, but I think I always go back and say, something, I trust my reasoning for the most part. And I'll say, okay, I had to have a good reason for that, and I'll keep it moving. And so when you posted that, I'm whenever you post something, I always start with the assumption that, well, Aaron had a really good reason for that.
Well, and I wasn't saying that, like, well, I've been reading this. I've been doing a lot of study on Franz Mesmer, and I've told you about that.
Yep.
And the reason I'm fascinated with this is because most people think that Mesmer, it's where we get the word mesmerized, and this will tie into Christ consciousness. But what most people would call Mesmer the father or the godfather or the grandfather of hypnosis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing could be further from the truth. What he was doing was not hypnosis. Now his theories, as to why what he was doing was working, have more or less probably proven to be false, right? Because he believed there's this magnetic energy that permeated everything, that he called animal magnetism, that he was working with in order to bring healing to patients, physical healing to patients.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first got exposed to the original work of Franz Mesmer, the reason I was drawn to it was because I thought, this is exactly what we did in church. This is exactly what we did in church.
Bingo.
And what's frustrating when you're looking at the history of it, what's frustrating is that the scientific community really was not scientific at the time, in this sense, because his theory as to why it was working was not credible scientifically. They just threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Completely.
And that's wrong.
So what frustrates me about that, in this case in particular, and this is why I'm saying I probably shouldn't have posted it, because I have this whole context for it, right?
Yeah.
What frustrates me about it is if the scientific community could have let go of their preconceived ideas, this is garbage because the theory behind it is garbage, really examine the phenomena and dug more deeply into it, instead of watering it down into power of suggestion and essentially what hypnosis is today, which is nothing like and doesn't get the results like what Mesmer did, right? And so I look at that and I think, what if it would have gone the other way? What if they would have accepted the results, the repeatability of what not only he was doing, but the people that he was trained were doing, and really researched it honestly? And so I come across this quote from Max Planck, and I'll read it here. He says, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it." And so it's a perfect example of what happened, is that sort of Mesmer's ideas got co-opted by the occult, particularly the spiritualist movement in the United States. Or it got into table tipping and all that stuff. And so even though there was what I think was good scientific research that was being done, because those that were opposing the predominant scientific opinion at the time that it was all garbage, because they died off. And so this view that it was garbage gets passed on to the next generation. What could have occurred gets lost. And that was kind of the point that I was trying to make. So that's why I was like, why did I post that? Because I have this whole content.
But let me say this to that point, because everything and everything is pseudoscience until a robust theory is achieved, right? That's like how you have eugenics and phrenology, that these have been scientifically disproven, right? They were pseudoscience. People researched this, they put it before peer review, it didn't hold water, and eventually it died out. What I think, with the things that Mesmer and his contemporaries did, I think that you made the correct assumption that they threw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, that sufficient scientific study was not given over to this. But here's the thing, right? That when you look at things like the men who stare at goats, right? There is something to this.
Right.
There is something to a metaphysical manifestation or a mystical manifestation. There's something to that. And I do believe, this is me, I can't speak for everyone, but this is me, and this is where I agree with you, is that I think that this is real, that there's more to it than just quantifiable science. However, I think that if we devote sufficient resources to researching and testing these phenomena that we call paranormal or mystical or metaphysical, I believe that given a sufficiently long timeline, that we're going to find that a lot of this is verifiable, that there is something to this.
Yeah. I guess, my frustration, I mean, it really is with Mesmer, because people say, well, it was power of suggestion, because they equate it with hypnosis, and they don't know what they're talking about, because it was nothing like what we have for hypnosis today.
Right.
That's the theory that survived, and actually that's what influenced Freud and the early psychologists, but that's not what Mesmer was doing. And so it's just frustrating to me that there was an opportunity there where these things could have been looked at scientifically, but because science also is a human institution, and it has its own prejudices and its own worldviews,
and its flaws
and its peer pressures, and he was kind of an asshole, Mesmer, and he pissed a lot of people off. So anyway, but moving on from that, so I was looking this up. I was asking AI, which I just have Google. I don't have Chat GPT or anything, but I was like, where did the term Christ consciousness come from? Right. And I could not find a sufficient answer. I couldn't find an answer anywhere. Googling. I tried asking the question a million different ways, because I was just curious, like, who originated that idea? Right. And so couldn't come up with anything. But I do know from some stuff I've been reading recently, there's a guy out there, Gerald Massey. He was an Egyptologist. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He did a lot of mythicist work early on in terms of Christ and Jesus Christ. And so if we're talking about Christ consciousness, people automatically are going to associate that with Jesus. But according to Massey, this is really fascinating. According to Massey, the word Christ comes from an ancient a word, a hieroglyph that was part of ancient Kemet, and it gets transliterated into our language as KRST. It's really fascinating. So the word in ancient Egyptian, whatever, like I said, hieroglyphs or languages, the first part of it is the word ka. And the word for soul in ancient Egypt was Kaaba, and it was two aspects of the soul. So this way predates Christianity, Judaism, Greek philosophy.
And one quick thing, that's the root of Kabbalah.
Yeah.
But continue on.
Yeah. So Ka means the life essence. It's kind of what you were talking about at the beginning as far as life, consciousness being life, right?
Yep.
And then Ba was the seat of the personality. So Christ or Charist, the RST, according to Massey, means rising. So it's the rising of the Ka. It's the rising of the life essence. And this tied it into Egyptian thinking about what happens to you after you die. So this is really interesting, right? So what they would do is they would mummify the bodies, which we know, and they would anoint. They would use all kinds of different chemicals and stuff that they would anoint these mummified bodies with to preserve them, right?
Yep.
And so the idea was, because they were a solar-oriented religious people, right? So the idea was that the sun would basically go to bed at night, would go to sleep, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea was that the Ka would return to the body if it had a place to rest. It would return to the body at night, and then it would rise up again with the sun. This is where this concept of Christ comes from and originates, at least according to Gerald Massey, right? So what's really fascinating about this, and I kind of fact-checked it a little bit, so some Egyptologists theorize that the mummification process was copied or influenced or taken from the caterpillar and the chrysalis, so that the wrappings of the mummy is a chrysalis, which also may have some similar root word etymology to Christ, right?
Very good.
So it's this idea that when the caterpillar dies inside the chrysalis, then the butterfly arises, right? So this is the idea of the life or the Ka rising. This is where this sort of comes from. So fast forward to Greek culture. You know, there's stories that Pythagoras, that Plato, that Aristotle, that all of them were influenced by the philosophies of Kemet. And then it becomes interesting when we look at the story of Jesus, whatever a person believes about that, but this idea that he rose from the dead, that Paul said, he was crucified, he was buried. It's interesting in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, this is my gospel. This is the most important thing, that Christ was crucified according to the scriptures, that he was buried according to the scriptures, and that he was raised from the dead. So the whole concept of Christ, to me, it makes sense. Jesus dying, rising from the dead, connecting that back with the anointing of the mummies, right? If you bring that forward into the conversation, into the concept, then from that perspective, not from a perspective of Christian religion, but from a perspective of Christ that's much older than that, then we can think about this in the sense of the chrysalis, or in the sense of a transformed consciousness, a transformed point of view that is higher and more liberated, right? So now watch this. So a caterpillar becomes a butterfly because they have what biologists call imaginal cells inside the body of the caterpillar. But what these imaginal cells have is the pattern of the butterfly. So when these imaginal cells get activated, they attack the caterpillar. And in fact, the caterpillar's immune system starts to fight this off. This is a disease. This is an invader. This is a germ. This is something bad, right? And eventually, these imaginal cells kill the caterpillar inside the chrysalis, right? Inside the cocoon, until what's in the pattern of the imaginal cells emerges as the butterfly. So I was just playing around with this and thinking, okay, caterpillars have imaginal cells, which is a future blueprint for what they are to become.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that as human beings, we have imaginal selves that operate in our consciousness that is a blueprint of a future self that we want to become or that we're trying to become?
Mm-hmm.
And at various different points, I can really I almost want to apply this to some of your situations that you've walked through in the last couple of years, that there was this future Derrick that was living a different existence,
Mm-hmm.
that was freer, that was more liberated. Same thing for me when I started to go through deconstruction, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that pattern of that self was already there in consciousness. And whenever it got activated, that new self begins to emerge, right?
Yep.
That new pattern begins to emerge. And immediately, as it starts to emerge, we think, oh my God, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like if we can even fight it, right?
Right.
And in the process, it can, in some sense, kill and destroy the old form,
Mm-hmm.
what we were.
Right.
And so I think that's how I would think about Christ consciousness. I would think about it from a transformative perspective rather than from a religious perspective, meaning that it doesn't matter really what anybody's religious convictions are or are not. It doesn't really matter what people's beliefs are even, because our beliefs will change. You and I are proof and examples of that, right?
Yeah.
So at some point in, the 2000s, there's this future self. For me, I'll speak for myself. There's this future self that's emerging that is nothing like the self that I was inhabiting, the form of the self that I was inhabiting in, let's say, 2008, 2009, 2010. And then in 2016, it gets activated.
But that pattern already existed in you.
But the pattern already existed. That's the key. That's the key. Because if we look at consciousness outside of the limitations of time and space,
come on,
then past, present, future isn't really as much of a thing, right?
Right.
So there was something. So, and I like this idea, and it could be bullshit, but I like this idea that our present is being impacted as much by our future as it is by our past.
Yep.
And interestingly enough, last thing I'll say, and I don't understand the science to it. I was going to send you the video. I don't think I sent it because I was watching it. I didn't have the ability to forward it to you, but I have to go back and find it. It's two scientists that are doing, some kind of DNA work and research in the laboratory, and they're developing a new theory of evolution. And the way they explained this was that Darwin's theory and previous theories about evolution are a pattern of descent. In other words, it comes from the past. It comes from our ancestors, comes from natural selection and survival of the fittest and adaptation and, all those principles. And what they're discovering, and I have no idea because I didn't understand half of what they were saying. It was above my pay grade. But they have discovered that it's quite possible that there is a pattern in, for lack of a better term, and this is my term, not theirs, the mind of the universe regarding every living thing that is organizing the evolutionary process. In other words, it's being pulled forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The pull towards evolution is coming from the future. Again, my language, not theirs, but coming from the future as opposed to coming from the past. Right. So if we begin to consider our lives in that perspective, then because we have a tendency to approach ourselves, our lives, our experience, our own consciousness, our own mental and emotional well-being from the perspective of our past, much like evolution. I'm here because of choices that I made. Right. What's going on right now is the consequences of choices that I made in the past. This view would say, no, there is a pattern for your future that exists that you haven't necessarily connected with,
Right.
but there is a means whereby you can work with that process to bring forth a new future and a new transformed self. And that self has to be anointed,
Connected,
merciless, in order for that transformation to take place. So I would see Christ consciousness as the process of transformation from a lower level of existence, if you will, to a higher level, to a more limited level of existence, to a more limitless level of existence that occurs in all of nature and that we participate in as human beings. And that's where I'll shut up.
You know, I think that, first of all, let's talk about Christ consciousness for a minute. And you know, I'm not a big fan of the Apostle Paul.
Sure.
And you know that, but he said something though that made a lot of sense. He said, "Let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus." Right. And so let this mind be in you, this thought, this consciousness, right, be in you that was also in this anointed one. Right. And so I think about this, and so I think about how when Jesus was resurrected, which I don't think that the resurrection is like a thing like being raised from the dead, like we've been commonly taught in church. What I think that this is that the figure of Jesus looked within, and when his internal wave function collapsed into a singularity, you know, in other words, he fell into his own spiritual black hole and he emerged as something else. And I like what you said about a pattern, that this pattern was not driven by his past. The pattern was driven by the future, that this is what he had to become in order to be, you know, the archetype for humanity, if you will. Okay. So I think about how Jesus appeared to his disciples in a room that was locked from the this room was locked from the outside. Was it locked? No, it was locked from the inside. So in other words, no one could unlock the door from the outside to let Jesus in. Right. So imagine if you, so, and this goes back to something else that we talked about too, like, you know, things that are able to breach the blood-brain barrier. Right. And that's kind of like a holy grail of medicine, right? Because if you're going to treat the brain, you have to treat the brain directly, or you have to treat the symptoms of the brain. You can't actually treat the brain directly with medicine because you can't break that barrier. So let's just say that Jesus broke the spiritual natural barrier. And this is where it gets interesting for me, because this is what I think, that if we can get to the point where we're able to tap into this anointing, tap into this consciousness, tap into this power, that we can actually divorce ourselves from our physical selves. We still have the form of the physical self, but we divorce ourselves from that so that we're able to traverse matter, right? And so now, if you are operating at that level, if you're vibrating at that frequency, like, so if we get real Trekky, Star Trek, right, that the whole concept behind the transporter mechanism is that the body's molecules are vibrated to a certain frequency, and in such a way that they can be shot toward a direction as an energy beam and then reconstituted on the other side. Let's say, for example, that we're able to breach this natural spiritual barrier. Now we can traverse matter, you know, that we can go into locked rooms. And I was, again, give a shout out to my friend Irv, that now we don't have to say, beam me up, Scotty. We just go, you know, and then the whole universe becomes our oyster. right?
Mm-hmm.
Because now we're able to go from matter to energy at will.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is what the Holy Grail is. And I think that if there was something that Jesus was trying to teach, it was not anything external. Jesus was never looking for people to worship him externally. He was never looking to be the object of worship. And fun fact, for those of you guys who are listening, Aaron and I, we're going to do a podcast in the not too distant future. We're still sorting out a lot of the logistics of this, but there are certain things in the Gnostic Gospels and treatises that I think that if you get this, we can get past a lot of the religious thinking and get past what actually holds humanity back. Because if we can get to the point where we're able to see each other as spirit, what did Paul say? He said that God is a spirit, and those who must worship him in spirit and in truth, right? Well, I don't think the worship is the objective anyway. First of all, I think that if God desires worship, he's a narcissist, right? That's me. Because if you created everything, you know you're a badass. You don't need anybody to affirm you. You just know, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But let's say that we're able to get to that point where the mind of creation, the mind of the universe, the mind of consciousness itself becomes so inculcated in us that we're able to at will shed this physical baggage, shed this mortal coil, and instead of collapsing into a singularity, let's say that we're able to take the singularity and expand outward.
Yeah.
That we then become the creators of universes, that we become the creators of realms. And if we get to that point, the division that religion creates no longer, it ceases to be, because now we have something that can no longer be weaponized. Mm-hmm. It's like, I see you for who you are. I see your energy, as well as I see your physical choice of manifestation. Mm-hmm. And I agree with these things as you agree with mine, right? And now I can say, if I want to explore the moons of Jupiter, I can simply decompose my energy into a form that is suitable for that level of exploration. And so when I think about consciousness, and I think about it in terms of the quantum, what if I'm able to observe my quantum state for myself? So now I divorce myself from agreement, mm-hmm. and I simply say, okay, I'm okay with seeing me differently than Aaron sees me. Mm-hmm. Now I can say my limitations, my physical limitations have been removed. And now I'm fully immersed in consciousness, in God, if you will.
Yeah.
And now I become one with it or him or her or whatever it is, whatever pronoun you choose to use. I said that intentionally, by the way.
Them.
Let's just say that we're, because again, when Jesus did this, he appeared to the disciples, and then you look at the upper room, right? The upper room experience in the book of Acts, and it's like you said, tongues of flames hovered above the heads of all of the disciples. That there was something going on here that transcended the physical. Mm-hmm. There was, and then and again, shout out to Irv. He was talking about the Philip going out to meet the Ethiopian eunuch. How did he get there? Philip vibrated to the point where he was able to, transcend space. And so again, to get back to what you were saying about time, right? Your past self, your future self, and your present self. If we're able to transcend our physical being and go to pure spiritual or pure energy, now the time then ceases to be a factor, mm-hmm. because time is how we measure physical things.
Right.
It's not how we don't measure energy by time. We don't measure metaphysics or the paranormal by time. These are things that operate independently of time. And then when you start talking about the God thing, how God operates outside of time. Well, I mean, if we come to the point where we're no longer bound by the physical, then we become God and we transcend time. And then at that point, Aaron, to your point, what you're saying about the future self influencing the present self, that there's something that you are expected to manifest somewhere down the line. If we can actually do that, if we can allow our future to dictate our present.
Exactly.
It's like, we people tell you don't worry about the future because the future will take care of itself. And I think that's, to your point, that's complete and utter bullshit. Because if the future has the ability to impact my present, I want the future. I want my future self. I want my better self. I want my higher self, my higher vibrational self, to crystallize me here and prepare my inner butterfly. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think that so this Christ consciousness. Okay, when let's say Christ. Okay, Christ anointed, right? Connected, mm-hmm. right? When you're connected, what do? Connection in the human sense, in the most human sense, is love. Mm-hmm. Love is how we're connected. This is the most common human connection. It's the lowest common denominator or the greatest common factor, whichever one whatever you want to call it. It's love. So let's say we're able to get to this and we're able to vibrate at the frequency of love. Mm-hmm. Now, I see you as who you are and what you are. I'm not jealous of you because you're taller than me or because you're more handsome than me or or because you have a better career than me. All of that is shed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm plugged into this greater consciousness. And man, I'm just like, my mind is racing right now because it's like, I'm almost like, I feel like I'm seeing something mm-hmm. that's beyond the veil. And I'm just really excited, but I'm going to kick it back to you.
No, man, that's good stuff. I'm drinking it in, soaking it in. I've been debating whether or not I should say this, but I mean, I would tell you privately.
Yeah.
But if it's one of those things I should put out there, I'm just going to put it out there. So, one of the things that I did in January, one of my goals for the new year, in terms of personal development and stuff like that, mm-hmm. is I started keeping a dream journal. Mm. And so, what I'm doing is keeping something. Actually, it's my iPad. I'd probably be better off with something else, but it's my iPad by the side of my bed.
Yeah, that's good.
And I'm setting an intention when I go to sleep that I'm going to remember my dreams. So what started happening to me was I would start waking up right after I had the dream. So midnight, depending on when I went to bed, midnight, 2. Sometimes I'd wake up 3 or 4 times in the night. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I would wake up, I'd grab my iPad and I'd write down my dream because I found that I will remember details if I do it right then that I won't remember. I'll forget
That's
about
correct.
In the morning, yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Downside of that is probably the blue light or whatever on the iPad. There have been nights that I couldn't get back to sleep.
Well, you can adjust the lighting at a certain time so it takes out the blue light.
I need to figure out. You're going to have to show me how to do that. But here's because here was my presupposition, and it's just an experiment. So here was my shit. I don't know if I should call it a hypothesis, but I'm gonna.
Yeah, hypothesis. Because here's the thing: until you submit it to peer review and further scrutiny, it still is a hypothesis. So
yeah. So my hypothesis was that our dreams give us wisdom and insight. In other words, that there is a benevolent intention to dream. So my first presupposition is it isn't the pizza I ate. It isn't my brain just processing the day's events, that I'm actually tapping into that field of consciousness that is the creator of all that is from my perspective. Mm-hmm. And that there is a benevolent movement. In other words, if I can properly understand my dreams, basically it's like, shit, can I say this?
Yeah.
taking the place of the Holy Spirit.
No, I mean that.
In the sense
Okay,
that
no,
a source of
change.
wisdom and guidance.
Let's change that around. Let's say that that's the Holy Spirit working in you.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's what it is.
Looking at it as a source of wisdom and guidance, right?
Yeah.
So I've been writing out my dreams. So the craziest thing's been happening has really been shifting my consciousness, this exercise, because then I'll interpret it, and I'm, using all kinds of different methods of interpretation, practicing interpreting it the next day, or interpreting all my dreams the next day. And sometimes I'll spend 3 hours, Derrick, working on the dreams that I had the night before. Here's the really interesting thing. Since January, I have had 4, let's call them prophetic dreams or precognitive dreams, where I dreamt about something that happened a week later, including today. I had a dream 2 weeks ago, and the concept of 2 weeks, the time frame of 2 weeks, was given to me in the dream, so I was paying attention, right? And I had an event today that unfolded what happened in my dream. Now, here's the thing. We're talking really insignificant stuff that would only be meaningful to me or my life, and even not necessarily super significant stuff as far as my life is concerned. So what I'm saying is I'm seeing the future in my dreams before it happens. But it's not who's going to win the lottery, or what's going to happen in the stock market, or what dumb thing the president's going to say next, or you see what I'm saying? It's just little things. Like, for example, I had a dream that my dog got attacked by another animal and got bit in its side. And we were treating its side in the dream, and I wrote it down. And like 3 or 4 days later, that actually happened. My dog got attacked, had to go to the vet, had a bite in exactly the place I saw it in its body in the dream. And this has happened to me before. I mean, when I was in the church, I would remember dreams, and sometimes 3 months later, the thing that I dreamt would happen. So I know for a fact that I'm tapping into something in the dreams that does not work with our concept of past, present, and future, and time and space, right?
Yeah.
But when you're asleep, you're able to shut down what I would call the consensus trance, which brings us back to what you were talking about at the very beginning, when you were talking about this agreement and the quantum dynamics of observation. We agree that that's a TV. We agree for healing. And so I think that our limitations come from these agreements that we've made as a community and as a society based on where we're at our level of development, right? And so my hypothesis was that when we sleep, we shut down that consensus trance. That's why all kinds of crazy shit happens in your dream.
That's powerful.
That does not follow anything to do with the laws of physics or life in general, right? Like crazy weird stuff happens in the dreams, right? So you're completely free from the consensus trance. And so therefore then all kinds of possibilities can emerge.
Yeah, if there's no agreement when you're in your dream, you're there by yourself. So the only one that you have to agree with is yourself. So and this is the other thing too that I find to be really interesting about dreams. And I think that how you say you're keeping a dream journal, I used to do that, and I need to get back to it, because in your dreams, right? Let's go back to the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. How did God create the heaven and the earth? With words, right? It is your words in your mind. You create an entire universe. It's like the people who are in your dreams are not the people who are in your reality.
Exactly.
They are the version of them that you have created in your dreams.
Exactly.
The house that you're in, it's not the house that you live in. It's the house that you've created in the beginning. So I know you like to talk about Edgar Cayce.
Yep.
And I love Edgar Cayce. He was called the sleeping prophet, right? Edgar Cayce would go into these trances and these deep sleep states, and he would prophesy things. Well, Edgar Cayce wasn't creating things from whole cloth. He was going out and look. I believe that he was a person that saw the past, present, and future, as you just articulated, and he was able to bring these things into the present. And I think this is, and you and I have talked about this privately, but I'm gonna speak on it publicly. Is that I really think that people who do really extraordinary things, that the Dr. Kings of the world, the John F. Kennedys of the world, that they go off into other dimensions and pull things from those dimensions into this reality that shape things. Because it's like when you look at Kennedy, it's like, imagine if this guy had served 2 full terms. The entire scope of the country would have changed. This guy was really a visionary. Dr. King was a visionary. RFK Sr. was a visionary. Malcolm X was a visionary. What was the lady who was she was the prophet? Golly, now it's not Mary Baker Edie. She's the Church of Christ scientist. I'm trying to think of this other lady. Anyway, it'll come back to me. But it's like these people they saw things that other people didn't see. And how do they see those? I believe that they were able to get outside of the timeline or get outside of the dimensional scope and pull something in, And I really think that people who amass this insane amount of wealth, I believe that they do that too, just for more nefarious purposes. But that's another thing, another topic for another time. But so what you were saying about keeping a dream journal, everybody that's watching, if you want to really get in touch with how your micro consciousness, your anointing, if you will, connects with the macro consciousness, I think that a good start is a dream journal, or any kind of journaling where you're keeping this. I'm going to say this. I'm going to put my wife on the spot because she dreams, and she'll wake me up in the middle of the night. I just had this dream, and these dreams, they seem kind of far out. Mm-hmm. But I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, this is not just a dream. This is a communication. And so to your point, that I think that dreams are consciousness, the macro consciousness speaking to us.
Yeah, that's my conclusion as well. Exactly that. It's the macro consciousness speaking, or us participating in the macro.
I said good things about you.
He did.
Maya's coming over here. She's giving me the pickle face. But I said good things about her because she has these dreams, and I believe that this is the universe speaking to me through her. So I don't discount any of it. And so when you say I've got a dream journal, dude, it's like that's fantastic. I think that we should all do that. We should all be more intentional about journaling, because I think that consciousness in the macro sense speaks to our micro consciousness and gives us data.
I have a friend that's been a friend for a really long time. Probably going on 2 decades. And she's incredibly gifted. Not just with dreams, but with visions as well. And, I can verify 100% that she has been able to, in 2 cases, basically solve. One was a missing persons case. And they found the person based on a vision that she had that told her exactly where that person was. And another one I can think about had to do with unfortunately a person that had been killed.
Mm.
And you know, the way she would tell it was his spirit came to her and gave her information, and she was able to identify where the body was. And you know, I don't want to say too much, because I don't, even though nobody knows who she is, I'm uncomfortable talking about people when I haven't gotten permission ahead of time to talk about them. But so we're talking about things in time, but these would be things in space. You know, there was this young man who was autistic who had been lost for, I think, 2 weeks. And because someone knew her and knew her gifting, someone from the family contacted her, and she was able to tap into a vision and tell them exactly where he was. And they got in the car and drove to where she described, because they knew it. They said, "Oh, I know exactly." It was a park. She described the park and sitting on a swing set, and they said, "I know exactly where that is." And got in the car, drove 30 minutes to the park, and there was that young man sitting on a swing set.
Wow.
And she does that kind of shit all the time. I mean, not shit, you know, she does that kind of stuff all the time. She's incredibly gifted.
So that gets to like what you talk about the metaphysical, the mystical, and things like that, because there is no scientific explanation for that, but that actually does happen, right?
Yeah.
And but I think that as we begin to understand consciousness, so one of the things is a big experimental thing is they're studying people at the time of death, right? And what happens at the time of death, right? When the body expires, you know, what happens? Is there some, you know, electromagnetic manifestation or something like that? And I think that we're getting close to kind of understanding what happens to the body's energy. Now, is this consciousness? Not exactly, but it's a step in that direction, you know. And so when you were talking about this lady who she sees, you know, crime scenes and things like that, I think that people like that, we call it in modern times, we call it the third eye, right? That Maya's messing with me. That we call this the third eye, and it's to be able to see beyond the senses, to be beyond the five senses. That and what I think is, you know, and again, if we're able to get to tap into this consciousness, and we're able to separate the religious implications of it, then I think that man. So I need to talk about this. We need to talk about this real quick.
Sure.
The pineal gland.
Yep.
Right. So the pineal gland, a lot of metaphysical and mystical people talk about the pineal gland as being the third eye, right?
Yep.
And there is evidence that people, that when they dissect human brains after being deceased, that people who that pineal gland is not calcified, because it has a tendency to be calcified in most people. But the people whose pineal glands are not calcified, they see things. They have been known to see beyond the veil. And so I think that I know one of the things that I learned, like I do this exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do this, you'll hear crunching going on, because there's calcification in your upper spine that gets broken up by moving your head around in that circle. I think that we need to find out what are the exercises that we need to do to break up the calcification in the pineal gland, so that our third eye operates as intended. Because I really think, and I'm going off on so many different tangents here, but I really think that we are designed naturally, or maybe not designed. Let's say evolved. That we are evolved naturally to be able to exercise these mystical and metaphysical abilities. But we're told that we can't or that we shouldn't.
Exactly.
And as a result, our body begins to calcify that and freeze it so that it can't operate. Mm-hmm. So when I think about consciousness breaking that veil, breaking the physical veil, and then when we break the physical veil, then we can break the metaphysical veil.
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff. This same friend, I was just thinking about, like, the way I met her. She showed up at our church. This was back in, Josiah wasn't even 1 year old yet. So we've been friends for 12. Let's see, he's going to be 14. So let's just say 12 years. And she came in, wanted to see me because she knew there was a little boy named Josiah. And he had some kind of a heart murmur or something. And so the doctor had referred him to a cardiologist, and we were waiting for the cardiologist's appointment. And I did not tell anybody. Nobody knew. Nobody in the church knew. Nobody in my family knew. The only people that knew about it was me and Julie. And she comes in and says, there's a little boy named Josiah who has a heart issue. And I'm just supposed to tell you that heart issue is nothing. It's a false alarm. And for some reason, I'm supposed to give $100 to this little boy, Josiah. Well, that Friday, remember this is on Sunday, that Friday, we opened a savings account for him.
Wow.
And he went to the cardiologist. They did the EKG. The cardiologist said there's nothing here. Might have just been a echo or something that they were hearing. He's fine. Take him home. But I was concerned about it. So again, this is nothing major. This is not, again, who's going to win the lottery? Who's going to win the Super Bowl? What's going to happen in our nation? Where the next war disease is going to break out? But there's something to this. Like she tapped in, and then that started this relationship that we had. And I mentored her for a while in prophetic stuff, and still a great friend, even, through all the deconstruction and stuff like that, still a really good friend. She told another person who had been looking for a job for months and putting in application after application after application, laid hands on her one day at church and saw the company that she was to work for. And again, I don't have permission to share these stories, so I just, but it was a company that this person had worked for in the past and had a unpleasant parting with them and didn't think there was any chance they would take them back. But based on this vision, went and put an application in and got hired that week for that position, and ended up with that job. So the extremely skeptical person is going to say, well, that's just, coincidence or whatever the case may be. But I don't believe that. I think that's part of that consensus trance that keeps us locked into limitation, being caterpillars instead of butterflies.
I like that whole consensus trance thing, because if you get past that, right? Because here's the thing, reality depends on agreement, but in order for you to individually rise above the reality that you sense for yourself, you have to break that consensus trance. There has to be some separation between, what people tell you. That's like you grow up and you say, oh, well, your father was this, so you're going to be that. Your mother was this, so you're going to be that. And if you're in the consensus trance, you're going to be yoked to that. You're going to hear that and you're going to say, okay, that's my fate. That's my future. But somehow or the other, what you said there, everybody that's listening, consensus trance, how do you break that?
I will say, especially since January, reality, I don't see reality the same way. It's much more fluid. Things are not as fixed and as set and as solid and as we think they are.
It's not. And again, if you think about it from a quantum standpoint, okay, so I was reading something that it said like bosons and fermitrons, that they may not be what we think that they are, right? Because they said fermions, they're social misfits. They like to be by themselves. But bosons like to get it on. They like to they're social animals, and they like to get with other bosons and hook up, right? But they're saying that now there's a guy that he took on a mathematical problem as a hobby, and now he's saying, okay, there's actually more fluidity between these things than we initially suspected, which has an implication on reality as we understand it. What does that mean? To your point, reality is not always what it seems. It has to be fluid, if that when we look at things at the quantum level, that observation influences outcome, or or destination, right? If that's the case, then that means that we can actually and so like when we think about like unified field theory and all of the everything that's in the unified field, the unified field is just a field of potentiality. It doesn't manifest in anything until we observe it or agree on it, right? But what if we're able to alter that? And then that gets to what you're saying about reality, that reality is not so fixed and predictable or reliable.
Yeah, some that makes me think about going back to the Bible in Genesis, when Adam, the Genesis 2 account of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And I realize there's a lot of sexist stuff in there and stuff, but when God is bringing the animals to Adam, and it says to see what he would call them,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever he called them, that's what they were. And we look at that again through the eyes of our culture, and we think he's just categorizing, like kind of like Darwin, right? He's just going out looking at various different species and categorizing them. But in the Hebrew language, what it means is that he brought them into being. He's participating in the creative process. Whatever he called them, that's what they became. So it's this sort of quantum principle that we're talking about.
Yep.
And if we realize that whoever came up with the myth of Adam and Eve did not foresee the Apostle Paul or St. Augustine or Martin Luther or the Catholic Church, perhaps these were stories, these were ways that ancient people understood the nature of reality and explained the nature of reality in unscientific but valid ways. In other words, this points to the truth of a phenomena and reality about the way the world is, but we're doing it in story form with symbol and metaphor, because we don't have a scientific language or process to describe what's happening.
Good point. The Tower of Babel.
Right.
It said, behold, the people are of one mind and one language, and they can do anything.
And it pissed God off. And he had to go fuck with it.
He had to go and fuck up the language.
No, but think about it. If they were all of one mind, there was no racism. There was no
sexism.
Mm-hmm. There was no social classism.
Right.
And somehow God said, I need to go fuck with that. I mean, like, we can't have that at all. Pure potentiality.
But watch this. If we take that as a principle, and say, what if we are all of one mind, all of one language, all of one purpose? What can we achieve or not achieve? And that gets to be some real things. That's why I think that this whole thing about consciousness, we need to divorce that from our religious sensibilities, right?
Yeah.
That and let me just say this. I don't have a problem with Christ consciousness. I don't think that Christ consciousness is necessarily a religious construct. Right. I think that when you when you say Christ consciousness has to align with a book, then I think that you get an error. But if you're saying, okay, Christ as anointing, as connection, as participating fully in consciousness, then we're saying, okay, that this is something that's valid. This is something that should be pursued. This is something that we should celebrate, or you know. And I think that's where we need to be. I mean, we just really need to, how can I just say this, to unshackle our thinking.
Yeah.
That's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, and I think the shackles, again, I don't know why I'm fixating on this tonight, but I think the shackles are a lot of consensus trance. And one of the other posts that I put, you know, my unforgivable post about but one of the other posts that I put up was, you know, religion really is a form of peer pressure.
Yep.
I was listening
that was a good post, by the way, because that's the truth.
Yeah, I was listening to Mitch Horowitz, who's an author that I really appreciate his work. He's a historian, but he was talking about sort of this process of self-discovery, and talking about being honest with what you want out of life, honest with your desires. And he said, don't tell anybody. He said, because you'll end up giving in to the peer pressure of whatever they think. They're going to tell you it's bullshit, or you can't do it, or it's selfish, or whatever the case may be. And so he's talking about this whole peer pressure thing. And he was saying, go back, try to remember, like, what was the earliest thing that you wanted out of life? You know, and he said, I can remember when I was 3 years old, and this was, you know, there was this thing that I wanted to do and accomplish in life. And I got to thinking about what would happen if we were left to our own purity in that sense, and didn't have to conform because of peer pressure, right? Conform to a certain way. And I started just as a thought experiment. What would a child who was able to be insulated from peer pressure, what would they look like? What would their life become? What kind of spirituality or religion, if there is one, would they have? And all religion is a form of peer pressure. And then I followed it up and put a post, you know. So I think a lot of what people call the voice of God, or call their conscience, stuff like that, is really just internalized religious peer pressure, that then they've so internalized it that becomes a program inside of them that's speaking to them. So thus it limits them. So thus it is a consensus trance, a way of thinking that's forged and formed by peer pressure, rather than something that's genuinely flowing from within the heart and reality and purity and authenticity of the person.
So let's unpack that real quick before we wrap up.
Sure.
What happens if we take the peer pressure out of it? You know, that you are free to decide who you are physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. What happens if we liberate our children to follow that path? In other words, you know, I'm not going to tell you how to think, or I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm just going to tell you how to think, and then you're free to draw your own conclusions. What happens then? Do we remain shackled by the physical, or do our children then begin to see the mystical, the metaphysical, the paranormal? Do they begin to see things that are beyond, you know, what our physical reality dictates? And so I think that you're onto something there. I mean, it's like it's causing me to grow in real time.
Well, I can say from my own experience that my son Elijah has second sight. I mean, he has that third eye sight. He just does. But there were two events that happened that I think were really important in his life. The first one was we this is so weird, man. It's hard for me to even believe. But we had planned a day we were going to do something, and the forecast, and usually the forecasters are somewhat right. I mean, we've kind of perfected the art of forecasting the weather, right? And they were forecasting clear skies and a nice day, even when we woke up that morning. And we were going to do something in the afternoon. And Elijah, maybe, he's barely got speech at this point. And he looks at us and says, "We can't do that today." And I'm like, "How come?" And he says, "Because it's going to rain." And so we said, "No, it's not going to rain. It's going to be clear skies." I mean, that was just a weird thing for him to say, right? And then he looks at Julie and me and he says, "No, the birds told me it's going to rain." And sure as shit, it clouded up and rained, and we weren't able to do what we were going to do that afternoon. And then later on, a few years down the road, he's older. He saw an apparition. He saw a ghost, earthbound spirit. And it would have been so easy, Derrick, to tell him, "That's just your imagination," because it terrified him. And you want to tell your kid to comfort them, "Oh, that's just your imagination. There's nothing really out there. You really didn't see anything, yada, yada, yada." But instead, we validated it. We said, "Yeah, you probably did see a girl, but she wasn't able to hurt you. Like, you're fine. Nothing bad has happened to you because of that." And so we kind of encouraged that rather than discouraged it, rather than telling him, "Oh, that's just your imagination. That was just a dream, son," all that kind of stuff. We've had a lot of dialogue, or I've had a lot of dialogue with him around this stuff. And as a result of that, his third eye has stayed open. And again, he's been able to give us information, honestly, from deceased relatives that he would have no way of knowing, not stuff that we would ever talk about or have ever talked about. Be able to describe events in detail that occurred that he wasn't present for, that we've never talked about, with information that he got from deceased relatives. So I think if a child were left alone, away from especially modern, and again, this is why, like, I don't have an issue with science. I think science is great, but I think it's very reductionary, or reductionist, and I think that causes us then to forfeit some of our human potential.
And like I agree that science is reductionist, right? But what I like about science, and this is why I kind of I lean more on the scientific view of things.
Yeah.
Because it is tangible, it is measurable, it is repeatable, and it is falsifiable. In other words, like I was thinking about this. There was a John Clerk Maxwell came up with this theory that when you exchange heated and cooled particles, that there was this demon that sat on the wall between these particles, and he dictated what went where, right? And so Maxwell's demon was not only a hypothesis, but it was an accepted theory for many years. And then Max Planck came and said, "No, that's not exactly what it is," right? That there is a method to the madness of the transfer of differentiating temperature particles. And so Maxwell's demon went away, but it was so ingrained in the scientific community that it's something that's still discussed to this day. So and matter of fact, when it comes to information theory, Maxwell's demon is still a thing, even though it's been disproven. So the thing about it, what I'm getting at is that science has a way of displacing that which is inferior.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, and this is where I don't even think we differ on this. Maybe we do. You can tell me if we do. I think when you're making a comparison between, let's say, religion and science, or superstition and science, or let's just take religion and science, when you understand, because you're saying, it's tangible, it's measurable, it's repeatable, therefore it is reliable. Am I understanding correctly? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah. So I think when we're making that comparison, yeah, I mean, like, do I want to believe that the earth is 6,000 years old and that we're in this mess because of two naked vegans that talk to a snake? Do I want to believe that somehow God got pissed off and destroyed the world in a flood, and we were able to get all the, Noah was able to get all the species of animals into a boat that was a certain dimensional size? Do I want to believe that there was a Tower of Babel and God, the creator, got pissed off because there was no sexism, no racism, no. I mean, I do think that ancient people, these were myths. I think they were speaking to something about the potential of humanity, and maybe even they were trying to show that religion fucks it up.
And I actually think that. I think that the story of the Tower of Babel is a story of like how religion fucks things up. But that's,
Yeah. So I think from that perspective, that I agree with that 100%. Where I take issue with it, with science, is that I think it limits us because we're saying the only thing, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but I'm saying scientism would say the only thing that is reliable, or the source of all revelation and information, comes from the scientific method. And I think that limits our human potential and also dehumanizes aspects of our soul. And so by that, I mean, yeah, sure, science has made our lives incredibly better. We wouldn't be able to do this. We wouldn't know each other.
Yeah, but where I agree with you is that you cannot discount someone's experience. If someone has had a metaphysical, mystical experience, a paranormal experience, I believe they have the experience.
Well, I told you about the scientists, the video that I was watching. I got to find it because I think you'll like it. Hopefully I can find it. I just cleared my YouTube history because I got sick of the algorithm and all the stuff that was coming up. So I don't know if I'll be able to find it, but it was an interesting statement, because what they're postulating is that there is some intelligent design. And the guy said this. He said, the one conclusion that's not, the one possibility, we don't have a full explanation of this. We can look at the phenomenon. We can say, based on what we're seeing, and again, this was above my pay grade, so, people forgive me for this, but whatever they were doing in the laboratory, whatever they were understanding, and they were talking about things like that I understood almost akin to cloning and various different things. And they're like, we're positive that natural selection, Darwin's theory of natural selection, is very incomplete. It doesn't tell us the whole story. Yeah. We're positive that there is a design, a pattern. They were really going back to Platonism in some respects, that there is a world of ideals and this is the world of forms. But they said the one thing we are trying to avoid, this is what they said, the one thing we are trying to avoid is the idea that there's a creator behind this. And I thought that was an interesting statement, because it kind of showed the prejudicial nature of scientific materialism. And I'm not trying to say, this is an apologetic for God. I hope people get that. But to just outright say, we absolutely won't consider that possibility. And then when I'm hearing people who have had paranormal experiences or have theories of consciousness about paranormal experiences, and they will say things like, 10 years ago, I couldn't talk about this. 5 years ago, I couldn't say this because I would lose my job. I would be vilified within the scientific community. So I think there is this very dark shadow side of scientific materialism that is very limiting and not for me. That's all I can say. It's not for me.
Yeah.
But however, I do agree when you compare it to superstitions of past times and the power of science to dispel superstition and to dispel religious ideology that has divided us and that has kept us in bondage. I'm totally on board with that. And I'm for all the progress that we can make scientifically because I love it. I crack up when I watch these videos about, well, we're going to eat like our ancestors did. Fuck you.
Right. I'm going to eat like modern people.
Fuck off.
So let me say this, that I think the science has its place. I think the science has a way of progressing humanity. Do I believe the science is prejudiced, that it has its biases? Absolutely. And where I think the science fails is when it gets dismissive, right?
Yeah.
That when science says, "Oh no, this person had a premonition. This premonition came true, and so therefore we say, okay, there's some extrasensory perception that's going on. There's something mystical, metaphysical going on, and science says, oh no, that's just a coincidence." No, I think that's lazy scholarship. That you're not investigating it further. And I have a problem with that. I have a problem with lazy scholarship in theology. I have a problem with lazy scholarship in history, and I have a problem with lazy scholarship in science.
So here's my question: do you think? Because I think this. I should put it forward. I mean, it's a very strong conviction of mine, and I'm, I know that you're free to disagree with me, and it's not going to affect our relationship. I know you know that. But I'm saying that for the benefit of the people out there. But do you think, though, that there is a prejudice against anything immaterial?
Absolutely.
In the scientific community.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I do too, and that's my issue.
And again, like going back to your initial thesis on Mesmer, right? What happens if the scientific community didn't dismiss that?
Right.
And they decided, okay, we're going to commit some resources to studying this and applying the scientific method to it. And this is the other thing too, is that I think that when we talk about things, when we talk about the paranormal, when we talk about the metaphysical, when we talk about the mystical, there are so many things that we consider to be those things until science revealed that they are this thing, right? That there is a means to figure things out, and I really believe that where science cops out is when they say, "Oh, well, that's just some metaphysical bullshit," and we're not going to do anything with that. I think that science does humanity a disservice when it does that, because I think that let's just say extrasensory projection or extrasensory perception, and let's say astral projection, for example. Mm-hmm. Imagine if we're able to astral project into worlds beyond our solar system. Mm-hmm. What does that mean to humanity? I mean that means that we're able to study things that we otherwise would not, because now we have people that we know are able to transport their consciousness into a different realm.
Yeah. Can I say something about that real quick? I know we need to shut this down, but I want to think about the best way to say this, because this will be this will be potentially a landmine that I'm about to step on here.
Well, we've never been bashful about landmines. So
here's part of my thinking. When you're talking about that, the Dogon tribe in Africa, they talk about that. They talk about astral projection to the Pleiades and various different other worlds. The Native Americans talk about all of these phenomena.
The Mormons have even talked about that.
Well, but I want to keep it to indigenous groups.
Okay.
That's what I'm about to say.
Okay.
And the Mormons are prejudiced as fuck.
True that. But keep going.
Yeah, so ancient shamans, and the traditions of these people would be that their shamans could travel to these places, that they could discover these worlds, that everything we're talking about, and also that this world that we're living in is not, that it's a dream on some, that the dream world came first, actually. And the physical world comes out of the dream world. All of these concepts, things that Bernardo Kastrup are talking about, and Dr. Donald Hoffman are talking about, and Rupert Sheldrake are talking about. These are ancient ideas of indigenous peoples. And to a certain degree, to be dismissive of that from a scientific perspective, and again, I'm not trying to disrespect science, but to make it your religion and to be disrespectful or to dismiss that as, oh, those people. It's colonial.
It is.
It's colonialism.
And it's racist as fuck. It really is.
Racist as fuck. And so that's part of the shadow side of materialism and physicalism, because everything we've been talking about, these are ancient ideas and ancient concepts that go back way before the time of Moses, supposedly, or Jesus, supposedly. I mean, one of the things I talked about on Sunday, and again, I'm going to shut up because I know we need to bring this to a close, but one of the things I've been talking about on my Sunday program is, and one of the things I shared in the group is, Western philosophy, Western spirituality is built on this idea that God has to reveal to us truth. And so he shows up to a certain individual and says, here's my revealed knowledge. That person writes it down, or in the case of Jesus, comes in the flesh, manifests, somebody writes it down, and the rest of us have to grope in the dark and try to figure it out. But it's built on a presupposition that God has to reveal things to us, right? Well, if humanity is 200,000 years old by most estimates that I can find, well, what happened for the other 198,000 years, right? Well, the other 198,000 years had a more shamanic and indigenous perspective of the world, and that gets dismissed almost outright because of colonialism and because of European superiority and this idea that the white man is more enlightened. I mean, that's just what it is. All right, I'm done.
No, I mean, bro, that is, that's a really huge thing, because a lot of science gets dismissed because it doesn't fit the Western paradigm.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Eastern mysticism, a lot of Hindu mysticism, a lot of African mysticism, a lot of Mesoamerican mysticism that just gets dismissed out of hand. And what, this is my thing, right? And this is where I agree with you wholeheartedly, right? That if you're going to say that the scientific method is going to be the yardstick by which we define our reality and everything that we use to define our reality, then we cannot dismiss anything. I mean, it's like literally everything needs to be studied and tested. And that, so like for example, again, the Western view of humanity is that humanity has been around for 200,000 years or so, right? In the East, China, Japan, that's they're looking at twice that.
Yeah, right? At least.
And then in Africa, the record goes back even further, although the problem with Africa, and this is a colonial issue, because a lot of records are destroyed and everything, and a lot of historical artifacts are not maintained. But there are African traditions that have humanity going back at least 1 million years.
Mm-hmm.
So I am completely on board with you that when we say, okay, I say I'm in favor of science. I'm not a scientific materialist. I believe that I hold out space for the metaphysical, for the mystical, for the paranormal. I hold out space for that.
Let me finish with this, because I think you'll like this. But for me, you'll tease with me sometimes that like I have a black soul or whatever, right?
Oh yeah, man, you're black as fuck.
But for me, this is very dear to my heart. Like I'm being serious here. Like African spirituality. Like I realized just recently, part of the reason I was drawn to the Pentecostal movement is because of the elements of Black spirituality that was brought into it via William Seymour. But I think of Africa as the cradle of salvation, cradle of civilization.
But salvation, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah. But in a much bigger sense than just this is where humanity began or whatever, it seems to me that every great idea originates and incubates in Africa. Mm-hmm. And I do think that there is knowledge and wisdom in African lore, and if we want to call it mythology and stories and spirituality, that they are somehow more tapped into the source. And I mean that in a metaphysical sense.
No, I'm with you.
Everything has to come through Africa, if that makes any sense to anybody at all. So when you say, in Africa, they believe we go back millions of years, I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
I think that's probably true. So anyway, that's my final thought.
I think the humanity is far older than we give it credit for. That the evolutionary pattern, and I love what you said about that. That there was something. Let me say this before we close, because I've told you this, and I'm going to say this for the sake of our audience. I believe that energy is sentient.
Mm-hmm.
That people say, oh, well, before everything, God. Okay, so if God pre-existed before everything, what existed before God? Mm-hmm. So now we get in, we go down this rabbit hole, and I'm like, okay, if you say that God is pre-existent, then I'm confident in saying the universe is pre-existent. Sure. And I'm not, for the record, I am not a believer in or a proponent of the Big Bang. Mm. You know what I call it? I call it the big breath. Mm. That right now we're in an expansion phase of the universe, and however many billions of years in our understanding this lasts, eventually it's going to slow down. We know that through laws of physics.
Yeah, that's a Kabbalistic idea, by the way. That's
it is. It is. And so eventually everything that expands must what? Contract.
Yeah.
And so this big bang, or this big exhale that we're in now, eventually is going to regress back into a big inhale, and we'll get back to that singularity, this ball of energy, and it's going, because all of this is going to collapse into one thing. It's just like the whole black hole theory, that once it passes the event horizon, it goes in and it collapses into a singularity. What happens to that singularity? Well, my theory, or my hypothesis is that it expands on the other side into another universe. That would be consistent with multiverse theory. Mm-hmm. And I think that this just kind of goes on ad infinitum. And then one last thing. There is a phenomenon called virtual particles, and virtual particles are the most leading candidate for the theory of dark energy, right? And so these virtual particles appear in pairs, a virtual particle and an antiparticle, and they exist for a moment, and then they destroy each other, and they move on. What if we're simply part of that? We're a virtual particle in the unified field. You know, we'll exist, and then an antiparticle, you know, similar to us, will appear, and will cease to exist, and this will repeat over and over again for eternity. I think that when we look at energy is neither created nor destroyed. That is something that has been modeled successfully in quantum physics in the law of conservation. That's something that mathematically is indisputable.
So what if, last thing, my third closing.
We're closing like Baptist preachers right now, man.
What if what we're talking about, what if the totality of reality, and for me that includes physical and non-material and non-physical, metaphysical, however someone wants to frame that.
Yeah.
What if it's more benevolent and glorious than anything we ever considered possible within religion?
I believe that's possible, and let me tell you why. Because you were talking about dreams, right? And this is the thing about dreams. I believe the dreams are 100% benevolent.
Yeah, I do too. 100%.
I don't think that there's any such thing as a bad dream. You have a bad dream when it's something that scares you, or when it's something that's outside of outside of your comfort zone. But I believe that it's still benevolent because it's trying to tell you something.
Yep.
Right.
Agree, 100%.
So I don't think that there's a such thing as bad dreams. And if that's the case, what if we are the dream of consciousness?
Yeah. Which goes back to the ancient concepts, the ancient indigenous concepts. Yep.
And so if we are the dream of consciousness and there is no malevolence in this, that means that what we're our objective, therefore, as humanity, as I won't even say as a creation, let's say as something that appears in the unified field, that our objective is to find the goodness in where we are, and to share this goodness, to manifest this goodness. And that's what I believe. I really believe that, when we look at religion, we look at politics, we look at race, we look at gender, we look at all of these things, all of these constructs that are designed to divide. What if we get to a point of understanding where there is no more division? At that point, I think that humanity achieves its highest objective. We begin to vibrate at the frequency that we're intended, and that we begin to explore and to shape this universe in the way that we as gods are supposed to. And that is my close.
Amen.
And it looks like, like in the YouTube section where there's a lot of comments, man.
Yeah, there is. There sure is.
A lot of comments, and here's the thing. I know we've gone over. We're at 1 hour and 48. I know you saw me eating here because,
I felt bad.
Maya put food in front of me, and I asked her to heat up this baked potato that she had that I knew she wasn't going to eat. So I'm trying to get in, before my 9 o'clock window. So let me just say this couple of things, right, before we break out. One is that my book, Deconstructing Religion 2, is available on Amazon. Go out and get it. I promise you, it's the last deconstructing book you're going to ever need. I promise you. And eventually, I'd like to do some workshops on that. And Aaron, I would like to have you participate.
I'd love it. That'd be great.
That's one thing. And then the second thing is, for those of you who haven't been following, I'm on this weight loss journey. I lost 40 pounds in 80 days. And and I'm on the way to achieving my goal. I went from 265 pounds. I'm going to 195. That's my goal, and I'm going to get there. I have like about 6 people now that I'm mentoring through this. If you're interested in losing weight, shoot me a direct message. I would like to include you in the whole program, and you will be part of my case study for the book that I'm writing about.
We should do an episode on our health journeys, because we've both been on a health journey.
We have.
We both have been successful, and it would be great to talk about that.
I think that it would be. I think that it would be. And you know, and if you haven't noticed, I've celebrated by shaving my beard off.
Yeah.
You know,
Looks good.
Yeah, it's like, you know, my Maya said I look like 20 years younger.
That's amazing. That's great.
So I'm here for the show, man. But anyway, that's it, man. Go ahead and close us out, and let's get out of here.
Hey, everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for growing in real time with us. And peace and anointing.
Peace and what?
Peace and hair anointing.
Hair anointing. There you go.
Peace and hair Christ.
Show them your hair, Aaron. Show them your hair. Let's see the hair. Look at that glorious hair. Look at him, man. Looking like Jesus.
That's my goal. I always wanted to be like Jesus.